Authenticity is everything. If it wasn't before, it most certainly is now on social, right? But if you start to look at a lot of brands, you may see that if you really look at their feeds, they're consistently getting low engagement. Community is different than social media. However, there is definitely some overlapping qualities of both of them.
I always like to start these things with a quote, and today I have engaging people is about meeting their needs, not yours. Tony Robbins. And to talk about engagement and social media with me today is Elizabeth Houston. She has 25 years of SaaS marketing communication experience, focusing the last 15 years on social media leadership. Take her experience from working with Workday, Hootsuite, Cisco. She provides consulting to help organizations develop their social media practices, create advocacy programs, and build executive social media presence. Elizabeth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Zivko. It's so wonderful to have a chat with you.
Absolutely. And I like the different approach that you have to these things. So it's not just the regular social media stuff. We're talking about brand advocacy and building executive social media presence. And that I feel like is very different from the regular stuff that we've seen so far. Before we dive into all those things, walk me through your journey of where did you start it, how that beginning looked like, and how do we get here today?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. So, yes, I've been in the workforce for nearly 30 years here. So, when I started in PR and then quickly learned that that was not really where my heart lied. And so I then pivoted over to marketing communications and spent really a large portion of my career there. And then while working at Cisco in 2008, I happened to have been on a cool Marcom team that supported executives for their keynote sessions at large conferences. And social media was just coming onto the scene, and the Facebook and the Twitter had just come onto the scene. And I was the technical one in the group that liked to tinker. And so I kept asking, should we be doing something on those channels? And I had done a little bit with community as well back at PeopleSoft even before that. So I always had a love for connecting people. And so it became a pet project for 3 months. And from there, it turned into a job that turned into then a career. They were very supportive there, and Cisco had a really open-minded culture about social media. They love technology and innovation, so that boded well. And that's really how I went from there to then leading different practices and developing a lot of curriculum around teaching advocacy, social media advocacy, so that employees and executives could really start to expand that brand presence and footprint that is so needed for a company. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I won't share too much yet.
Now, you said you started doing these projects in companies and cultures where it was encouraged. Have you been in a position where you saw that there was an opportunity and there was a path going forward, but that was not just part of the vision of the company? And how do you go about in a situation like that?
Yeah, it's a great question you're asking. And I think that actually, if we were to take a poll of companies out there, we would find that the large percentage of them would be more fearful of social media than aggressive about jumping into social media, at least for B2B, especially SaaS and other areas where they're high on innovation, but a little bit afraid on that two-way communication on social media, right? Social media also gets a bad rap sometimes that it's, an unsafe place or that a lot of negative sentiment could be given to a brand. So yes, I've actually spent quite a bit of time with companies where they were very risk averse and social media felt like a large risk. And so a lot of my time was spent on a few areas. One, buy-in from executives to show the proof that social media can be more than just tactics, but it really is a strategy that is very much a main element in the whole marketing strategy and how you achieve goals. Because if you think about it, social media is one of the channels that a company can use in many different areas of the organization. There's a marketing aspect, there's a sales aspect for sure, right? And the companies we see thriving are the ones that are doubling down on social selling or even just social listening to get indicators. And then you've got customer support. When I was at Cisco, for example, they saw millions of dollars savings because they could mitigate certain situations through social media or their community versus the call center. So huge savings there, right? And then you've also got HR recruiting. So it really runs the gamut of where it can be used. So those situations, you've got to try to get buy-in over time. You've got to stay very laser focused so that the executives start to buy in. And if you can find a sponsor within the organization, that helps. And then over time, it's just ticking away at it. And that consistency of showing presence helps, because then you're going to start to see momentum, and you can use that as proof points when you are meeting with those executives to show, right? And then if you can really collaborate with those other teams in marketing that are also doing strategies and really make social an integrated part, now social media has an opportunity to sing out there versus being a silo side effect, that can only have limited effects.
Got it. So it slowly becomes a like you mentioned, like you get a sponsor, then you get the team to collaborate, and it's not just a marketing team is doing social media. Social media for this organization is uh, more than that. Like you mentioned, the channels of and the benefits from customer service, selling, to marketing, to HR and recruitment, and you're presenting it as a part of multiple departments. It's not just the marketing department that is doing social, and we kind of look at them and click and like at our company's social media posts. Now, that kind of moves us into the advocacy part. How much of that is advocacy? What is exactly social media advocacy?
Yeah, so social media advocacy is the opportunity to leverage your best assets to expand your brand presence. And that's really your employees and your executives to start. And then certainly over time, it's customers and partners, then influencers, and then the at-large audience. But those are to come later. But if you can really start with identifying how can you give branded content to your employees in an easy form that they can go and share with their own networks, hopefully with their own voice layered on top so that it's authentic and not just robot advertisements going out for the brand, right? If you can do that, and if you can start to cultivate executive thought leadership voices out there, and that comes in many different forms, and we can talk about that too, because not every executive is going to feel comfortable to just be out on social media, nor do they always have the time. Employees are a little different in that regard. They're very busy too, but they've got subject matter expertise that could be great reputation building for their own careers as well as for the brand. So leveraging those folks makes a huge difference. At the last company that I was with, they were reaching $3 million in ad savings of getting new reach, new audience members to pay attention to the brand. That's huge when you start to think about that was just a small group of people at the company doing it. But when you start to get really large scale, so that was, just to give reference, that was like, maybe 700 people doing that. 700 to get 3 million. Okay, now you do the math. When you start to get the whole organization, or at least all of sales, all of marketing, all of product marketing, all those folks in there, now you're talking about a huge impact to the brand and to the business's bottom line as well. And then you layer in the executives, and they can come in many different forms. They could, be where they're participating themselves on, let's say, LinkedIn blog posts
Mhm.
and cultivating their brand that way. But if they don't feel comfortable, they could still be positioned on social media with the short video clip on the branded channels that still give them that thought leadership reputation and presence, but they don't have to do it themselves. So there are many ways to go about it.
Now, when you're going through this process where there's someone like you that is showing all the benefits to the company, and you start to get the buy-ins, you start to get the sponsors, like you mentioned, to move this across the board. What is the first initial pushback that you would get from executives and from employees that they would say I love the company, I love my job, I see myself here for like retirement, but I don't want to do the social media posting company stuff on my social media.
Yeah, the very first pushback or a barrier which I like to think of it as a speed bump rather than a roadblock, because I think there are ways to get around it. But the very first one is, well, our employees are not really active on social media. They don't really feel comfortable. And that very well may be true. But then I would ask the question, were they ever encouraged to have social presence? And were they trained so that they've got the proper parameters and guardrails to feel safe participating on behalf of the brand? Because there is a responsibility to use it in a way that's lawful, that is always protecting the reputation of the brand first versus their own opinions that might counter, or potentially they put something benign out there that feels like it's just their own opinion, but actually it might go against what the values of the company are. And so then that creates its own little mini crisis there, right? So there are some things to be thinking about, but could that be taught? Absolutely. You give them a policy, you give them a quick training that tells them the do's and don'ts. And then you also give them training on what are the best ways to participate on the channels you want to participate in. Certainly the best practices are a little bit different channel to channel or platform to platform, but there are some definitely common threads of how to participate. And so I think that doing that, as well as highlighting those employee advocates that are doing a good job. If you lift them up, they will start to be leaders that will influence their others. And if you think about it, social media in general, I think the latest stat is that peers that share to other peers, or really employees that share on behalf of the brand versus the brand itself, actually has 10 times the actual impact to reach, to engagement, positive sentiment, you name it, all the different vanity metrics. Those employees are going to have a much larger impact because there's trust when you go peer to peer versus a brand telling you how it is. Long gone are the days that a brand can just call the shots. Now it's in the hands of the consumers, and they really write the narrative, right? So the more that we can incorporate storytelling in from the employee's perspective, from companies, but really focusing in on the audience's care abouts, now you've got a really good recipe for success.
Right. And you're seeing that there has to be an element of teaching, coaching, training, guidelines, and SOPs and all that for the employees because someone could express opinions and thoughts, feelings on a branded content that is now, like you said, creates a mini crisis. Not necessarily preventing them from expressing thoughts, feelings, and emotions and how they think on their own posts and what they do on their own social media. So this is not a complete takeover. It's just some things when you post on the brand side, there are some specific things you should follow, and then on your personal and whatever you want to express, it's perfectly fine. So it's not like a complete takeover. It's just more our content. You got to be following the guidelines because we don't want to get into that sticky situation. When you have the executives, you said they have to express it and preferably in their own voice. You got a CFO in front of you who is expressing thoughts and opinions in numbers, profits, losses, accounts receivable, payable, whatever they might do. What is the right approach to take someone like that is maybe technical, not really keen on expressing his own thoughts and opinions to change the branded content? How do you go about to show the benefit to a person like that for them, for the company, for the team, so that they actually start doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially when you're picking an executive that doesn't have the fluffy sides of the business that they can talk about. So let's take that example. I think the very first step, most likely, and I don't mean to generalize, but I think the ones that I have encountered anyways, executives that have more technical roles or those really regulated roles, they tend to be a little bit more fearful of participating, or a little bit more introverted for social media, so to speak, not necessarily introverted as personalities.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, the very first thing to do is to sit down with them and figure out, Do they have a goal that is for their own career aspirations around reputation building or thought leadership? If the answer is yes, then that's where, you would introduce the opportunity for them to practice internally first. So using their intranets, Slack, whatever their platform of choice is, where they can do short videos, let's say, that is to their team. They're practicing ways that they could present themselves, position ideas, do it in a crisp format, all those things in a safe space where they're going to get positive reinforcement for that. They're going to learn a few things. They're also going to learn how do they like to communicate, because some may not even be totally clear on how they want to communicate. Then you can transpose that slowly onto whatever platform is going to be best served for that personality type. So that would be one place. The other thing is, I always recommend that executives start with social listening first. So, a CFO, for example, if I were doing a one-on-one training with a CFO, I provide in that very first meeting, after we get a sense for what it is that executive wants to do, I give at least 5 to 10 different peer examples that are active on social media to show what it could look like. But it's
Mhm.
also a great way that they can pick and choose. I like that tone, but I don't like that format and all that stuff, so that you can help to cultivate what their presence might look like. The other thing that you haven't asked yet, and I'm wondering if you might, so I'll just toss this out there, is this idea about ghostwriting for executives and also AI writing for executives, because that plays into these personality types that maybe are not so comfortable. And if they can find a loophole to actually doing that work, then they might do it. I'm seeing a lot more of that now. And that worries me in a time where, especially when we talk about AI, um, authenticity is everything. If it wasn't before, it most certainly is now on social, right? Because we're picking and choosing, oh, there's an M dash, that must be AI. Oh, there's an emoji, that might, and that may not be the case, right? But we're grappling with what is truth and what is not authentic voices, right?
Yeah.
So trying to figure that piece out is really important, because an executive that goes out there using these different tools may actually backfire in terms of not only their own reputation, but also the brand's reputation. So you have to be really careful of how you position that executive.
It's a good way to that you went in that direction because it was one of my questions to understand as part of the is that one of the options that they go for, and what are your thoughts on that option? Because they might not want to do it to express to that degree, and it feels like the concern with ghostwriting and AI, which more is AI now, less ghostwriting, is the component of authenticity. They're regurgitating things that are available, and like you said, you start to nitpick: is it true? Is it not? What does this mean? I've seen this one, the magic of unleash this. You start to notice those things, and you're like, oh, it's not a authentic way of to present the brand, and then it backfires. Is there, in that scenario, is there is there a way for the marketing team and the person that is implementing the brand advocacy to set up some sort of uh, AI agents or anything that will help them be authentic, give them bullet points, or any way you go down that path, it's just not authentic. You just end up to the same place.
Oh, such a good question. And I have a very um, strong opinion that is probably old school here. So I'm going to try to stay open-minded about it, because I know the world is changing. I think at the end of the day, authenticity is the most important goal that any executive, really anybody participating on social media, should strive for. So if that means that they're getting some assistance from AI for things like, for example, I did do a post, I don't know, a month ago maybe, where I needed some statistics. And I typically don't use AI to write my own things. But in this case, I thought I should try this out. I should start to learn about it anyways, because execs are asking for it, right? And so in that case, I was using it to help me do research, which cut down my time quite a bit. And then I would write it on my own. That's one scenario that works well. Some executives don't want that though. They really do want, let's put some bullet points in there, let it, do that, and then let me edit it from there. So my thought is it's better than ghostwriting in itself, where somebody totally wrote the thing outside of your, voice, and then you just reviewed it to approve it. But I still think that I would encourage executives to do to really identify what they need AI for versus their own voice, and to trust that their voice is going to be the best approach. Because think of the audience. You meet someone online, but let's say you go to a conference after that and they seem really different between their online voice and in person, right? It is very possible that that could happen, because we can hide behind our digital devices here, and people may not necessarily know, if that is truly their personality type or not. That would take time and consistency. That's the other thing about AI. When you're writing authentically and in your own voice, you tend to veer towards the same types of topics, you have the same viewpoints, and it starts to be a consistent story over time. With AI, it could start to feel a little bit
Yeah.
jarring between each post, which then may cut down that credibility. Does
Yes,
that make sense?
it is true because depending on how it doesn't matter how good the prompt is, if you not go with the new models which have the reasoning aspect to it, it starts to create what you think is best, but it's not. At that point, you go down the path of creating the AI agents and kind of teaching it consistently to stay on. This is how I would write, and you're hoping that that stays. Whereas I feel like I don't think it's a old school method or anything like that of thinking. I think there's a clear division of if you want to rapidly kind of do something and you're taking the risks and you know what's going to happen, you go that path. And if you're going to play the long-term game, it will always stick and it will always land because those are the people that we will still remember. Like in my opinion, Steve Jobs will be Steve Jobs, and Tim, who knows? Maybe you'll remember, but you will never put him at that level. And that
Right.
guy in today's time, I think he would not use AI to change how he talks, how he does his keynote, the way he was very direct on interviews, authentic. You may not like the answers and how it's not, but Tim, you see on the other side, very kind of guided, and you can kind of expect the same kind of answer consistently. And it's not the same. You don't remember them in the same way.
No, you're so right about that. I think also when you start to think about these executives, and they're trying to cut through the noise just like anybody else. And AI is only creating more noise in the social space, right? Now you're seeing LinkedIn, the latest update was that LinkedIn is starting to think about limiting how many comments you can put a day, because AI is churning out so many, right? I just had an experience recently where I thought, I think this wasn't a real person that responded to me. And then that makes it feel like, well, why goes back to the question of, why are we using social media in the first place versus any other communications channel? If an executive is participating on social media, they need to have very clear goals as to what they're using it for. What do they want to get out of it? And that really goes for any of us, not just executives, right? If our goal is to connect with others, and like you said, to play the long game, especially consultants, for example, where we would want to nurture business opportunities over time, then that gets scary if you're not being consistent, if you're not putting in the actual work to do it, and cutting through that AI noise. So that's something else to think about, of going back to the foundation. Why are you participating on social? Connection is everything. I don't want to connect with a bot. I want to connect with an actual human being, right?
Yeah,
So,
it is. I've said this to many people when we have these conversations because they would say, okay, you do your LinkedIn outreach and you do it organically with people. Why not switch it to AI because it's 10 times faster, cheaper, overhead goes down. And my go-to very frequently is it's it feels like it's not a foundation built on trust. It's not built on trust where if I have it's like going back to the days where if you had an assistant and an assistant made a 10, 15 calls on your behalf to fill people in your calendar, it's still you and it's still a real person, and we still will do the right thing. If I have a bot, not a real person, you're like, can I speak to Elizabeth? Actually, she's like, that is horrible to start on that kind of relationship, to start from that point and build it forward. And when you're saying, why are we even on social media? You have now a negative um, impression in front of not just potential clients, but your customers as well, because you know that they just have chatbots. Like you will never get to a real person, and everybody hates that feeling. Facebook is notorious, in my experience. Good luck connecting with someone, a real person, to talk in anything meta. Good luck finding. I don't care about the chatbots. Sometimes it's like they're not even helping the community. Fantastic, but a real person at the end of the day is what you might need in specific situations. When you see these when you see it playing out that way, is there a way to, in today's time, with the volume, with all the stuff that we have, is there a way for a going to the customer service element from the social media? Is there a way that you can reach out to a social media account from the company to um, talk with real people, not hit a bot, to talk to a real person in order to have a proper engagement, proper conversation about something, or in today's time, from one of the companies that you worked for and what you've seen, probably will always hit an AI agent or a bot.
I know that there was a lot of talk before I left my last company within the social team of maybe we should try a little AI here for commenting and things like that. I don't know where it went from there, but here's what I would say. I get really concerned when we think about AI taking over commenting or even writing posts for this reason. I think that it gets really difficult. Oh, I'm now trying to remember my thought there. So it's just really, how do you make sure that you're catching nuances? There are certain things that only a human would know about that customer that's commenting or whatever that is. And AI is not going to be able to catch that.
Yeah.
So that's something to be thinking about. In terms of the speed, I absolutely get that. I also think it's very intriguing that you could put in a certain set of points or whatever, and then AI gives you 30 posts or whatever. I get that. That's cool. And we do know social media, like any other marketing communication vehicle, repetition is key in order for an audience to buy. What is it, like 7 times you have
Yeah.
to hear about it before you do something? So I get that as well. But could we not find creative ways to do that as humans? Because that's the thing. If you ever have done AI, any type of AI work, you'll see that it tends to get a little diluted when it spits it out. And then I know you can train the voice and tone, but it's never going to be an exact match to how you are because we have emotions, which AI doesn't. And at the end of the day, the way that social gets the most engagement is through an emotional connection. That's that human to human interaction again. So, I think there's something to be said about that, that no matter how great AI gets, at least at this point, there's still going to be a gap between the robotic, non-emotion output and a human that is unpredictable. And
Yeah.
so they might, something might really trigger them that they have a passion for or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
we got to be really careful about that.
I think it's a good idea, and I feel like the larger the organization and the longer they want to play the game and the longer they want to stay in business, they really don't use that much. It's new entrepreneurs and smaller teams that are trying anything and everything to get ahead. And it might help you to a degree, but it's at a specific level. I think it starts to drop. It starts to drop because that authenticity is being the diminishing results. Basically, you have less and less of that's an authentic brand, and that's at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do with brand advocacy. Now, if we take someone looking at this and hearing you talk about how to implement it and what are the things that are expected from the employees and what are the things expected from the execs. Um, let's take them to the beginning. Let's take them to day one. they say like, this sounds interesting. I got these pieces and glimpses. How do I do this? So how do I implement brand advocacy in a company with, let's say, 50 team people?
Yeah. So the very first step would be to start a pilot with a much smaller set of people. I love starting with the sales organization because usually they are the most open to new approaches. But two, they're using social selling and social listening so much more now because their competitors are as well. And there's a lot of conversations that happen where a salesperson could actually get into the conversation, come from an educational approach, and then take that elsewhere that turns into potential leads. So starting with that, what I would recommend is getting a group of branded content that they could share and starting very easily where you're not getting platforms, pardon me, not getting platforms or anything like that. You're just giving maybe 10 samples of different branded content that they could share just to get their feet wet. But in addition to that, they have to have the proper training. Now, I have gone through the gamut of a lot of training up front in order to get the keys to the Ferrari to very little up front and hope for the best, hope they got car insurance and go. So and so that's where you need to understand how does your team actually get motivated to do something new and to really understand up front what might be the fears and
Mhm.
to break down those barriers first. So if, for example, they are a fearful bunch to get onto social, well, let's not have them go through 30 courses in order to participate, right? You can ease into that over time where they can aspire to get certain certifications or become multi-tier advocates, which there's some really cool programs of where you over time you're giving them new opportunities that are for the more advanced, players in the game, if you will. So starting small, small pilot. The other part that has to happen is that you have to have resources on the social team or somewhere where they can start to see who's participating. What kind of performance are they seeing? Start to highlight those people because, again, those are influencers to the others. And then over time, you expand that out to a full program. Then, once it gets to a place of where it's a little unmanageable to be sending out, let's say, an email per week with sample posts or a Slack message or whatever, then that's where a company really needs to invest in a platform. There are many social advocacy platforms out there. I have some of my favorites, but I think it comes down to what is going to be the best for the organization and what are they trying to achieve. Like for example, LinkedIn has their own version, but that means that they only want you using LinkedIn. But not everybody wants to be presenting themselves on LinkedIn. Maybe they want to be on X or Instagram or whatever. So looking for agnostic platforms that allow you to share where your audiences are is another thing. But that's the next level, the phased
Right. So,
approach.
so it sounds like that organizations have to understand that this is the marketing person, and he's just like resharing through an automation tool or social media posting tool, resharing on other accounts. This is someone that gives assets. Let's say these are the top 10 posts that you guys can use from here. And then, and you can correct me if I'm not getting it. And then the employees or the execs, do they reshare them with their own thoughts, or they take it, put their spin, and they say, here's the link to the blog or here's the link to the post?
It can actually happen anyway. The only way we would rather not see it happen, I just had a conversation with an executive recently where he was like, "Oh my gosh, I just want to make sure that people are not just sharing branded posted posts by just reposting with no comments that just looks like they're spamming the brand on there, which is going to reverberate back to the brand." So either taking the post itself and adding their own comment on top. Like I found point number 3 to be really interesting in this new, product update. Check it out, that kind of thing. Or it could be something like you said, where they're just taking the link and they're sharing their own thing. The one thing that's probably a detriment in that second
Mhm.
example is that at the end of the day, the brand wants as much exposure and all of that goodness of the sharing to come back to the metrics they're trying to measure. So by an employee doing a repost with comments, that helps. Now, can I put a wrinkle in all of that that just came up? LinkedIn, now the algorithm rewards reposts without comments versus reposts with comments. So this is now a dilemma for social advocacy and how do brands go about that in the future. So in that case, what I would recommend is instead of a repost at all, that you really do take time as the organization to come up with the assets, like you said, and sample messages and
Mhm.
start out that way where they can just copy and paste sample messages with the graphic. It's their own, but you can still connect the attribution back to the brand.
And,
That would be the way to get around that whole new algorithm issue.
and in this situation, so if someone is like, okay, let's make it real. It can be as simple as you have a SaaS, you ship up new stuff every 3 weeks or 2 weeks. You ship updates, or instead of that email, we updated this, and that becomes a post for 50 employees where you're like, this is the update we just did. Here is the link to the blog, 3, 4 sample messages. You take it, and now the developer will put his thoughts like, just finished developing this. Here is the update, and then the CEO will say, happy to say thank you to the whole team. We just did this. Here's the update of the list. That's kind of the idea.
Exactly. That is you see, you be set in employee advocacy. That is exactly right. Because then what you're doing is you're getting the goodness of the subject matter expert actually putting their own expertise into it, which adds validity and trust to the post versus if the brand sends out that message, it's going to get some likes for
Yeah.
sure because you got your loyalists, but it's
Cool.
not
Cool.
going to
Yeah.
get that two-way engagement that if you and I were, let's say you posted it and I replied, well, LinkedIn, as an example, the algorithm really rewards commenting. So if you put something out and I see it and I'm interested in that and have a perspective to share, I'm going to engage with you for sure, which is then going to help the brand as that halo effect.
Yes, and it's important what you're mentioning that that is rewarded on LinkedIn. That might not be the case for YouTube videos. That may not be the case if you are doing Facebook or Instagram or any other social media platform. Now, what I feel like there is a little bit of an overlap where some people will start to say, I have a community. Like, why would I do this when I have this massive community? Um, and then it becomes not necessary, or I feel like I'm doing repetitive stuff, or my team does communicate or there's guardrails, we can't talk anymore. How do we navigate that? How do we say this is one thing, community building is another thing?
Oh, that is such a good question and such a hot topic right now in some circles. Community is different than social media. However, there is definitely some overlapping qualities of both of them, right? They're both interactive settings, environments that you can participate in with similar interests. But the big difference is this: a community is an identified number and group of people that are assembling for a common cause or common interest or common need. And so they're defined and they participate regularly in that group. They build relationships over time because it's the same group. You might add some people might leave, but the core of it always remains the same. They're always going to be interested in that brand thing or whatever that, they're congregating for. Social media is completely different in that regard because yes, you may assemble some people that are interested in a topic, and yes, you might be able to create lists that you follow and stuff like that, but they're not congregating as a group in the same way. And also, the whole purpose of social media and the genesis of it was to be able to reach people that you never would have been able to reach before geographically or industry wise or even titles. We've broken down all those barriers, right? You could, if you wanted to, tweet a celebrity today, and the celebrity might tweet you back, you know? So there's a big difference in how social is used. This is where they can work together, though. You've got your established community, and these will likely be your biggest loyalists or your biggest naysayers as well that can help to improve a product too, right? But likely they are very well invested in your brand or whatever it is that you're congregating for. You could use social media as your outreach to pull in new members that maybe didn't hear about the community or are wanting to become loyalists. They might be new customers, whatever it is. And you're cultivating that storytelling at the broader level for the brand through social media. And then you're getting real deep into certain topics within that safe environment of a community. So they can work together. You may also do vice versa. Like, for example, if on social media, social listening, you start to hear rumblings about this is always broken with your product, or I can't do this, or I really wish it did this, right? That could be brought back into the community and discussed, maybe even innovated on in a collaborative crowdsourcing perspective. And then also it's a way to alert those loyalists that may be admins for that platform, for their own, organizations or whatever, that, gosh, we're hearing a lot, but they just need the training because this is actually how it works. And I think there's miscommunication out with the end users or whatever. So then they become that education place that then they become your biggest messengers within that community. But you can also take the richness of the community and put that back out on social to educate at the mass level.
Got it. It's a clear difference because one is a well-defined group of loyalists or naysayers, uh, but it's well-defined. And with social, you can bring people there, but you're reaching out to a broader, and the overlap is the engagement part. And this is where people kind of correlate them instead of understanding it's two different components overlapping on, yes, you want to engage and interact with both sides, but with one is well-defined, you can dive deep into a topic. Whereas on social media, if you post, I don't know if you work for like QuickBooks and you ask a specific question about something that is used in the platform, a lot of people will not know what you're talking about. But in the group of QuickBooks, then you will get, yes, that feature sucks, man. Change it. Or this one is fantastic because they understand, like you said, you can go deep into that topic. But on a social post, you really can't. You will not have the
No,
same engagement. You might do
that's
it,
right.
but you will not have the same engagement. And
And also, there's a much higher crisis potential in social media than in the community. Because the community, likely, they're not just sticking in that community. They might actually meet offline at some point or face to face like this
yeah,
versus social media. You may never meet the person, and that spreads like wildfire with one little negative comment. Now you got a crisis on your hands.
it's true because it's yes, it's broader. Now, to avoid crisis, we've all been in those situations where we've said something, they're like, oh, I didn't expect those types of comments, or I didn't see it from that perspective. And you made a mistake, you want to correct it. But let's say taking a step further to not get into that position. What is the right way or the things that we need to do to get the most out of our interactions on social so that it's a positive experience?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Um, it comes down to we've got to definitely be consistent from the start. A consistent voice, consistent focus on content and what we're even saying, who's saying it. If we have that consistency, then when something negative happens, likely the audience is going to believe the brand because they've shown a consistent track record versus if they're kind of haphazard in their storytelling, then it starts to poke holes and potentially whatever that negative piece of feedback is starts to almost maybe prove the point that there's a gap of some sort or whatever. That's one. The second thing that I highly, highly recommend is, and actually I will be doing a post on this soon, is that a social media listening practice must be one of the foundational parts when you're starting a practice and must be present there and grown actually over time. So having dedicated resources, whether that's a person on the team plus an agency that can help you to scale, plus the right listening platform, you must have those things because those negative comments tend to happen at night or on weekends when you're not looking at your own channels or whatever, right? But also, it does not happen, in my experience, it happens in the broader chatter that you may not be monitoring as closely because it's not an attack to your brand channels themselves, right? But those other ones can be far more detrimental because they're in their own circles, their own little communities talking about it, right?
Right.
So social listening is super key, consistency, and then also having a plan, a response plan internally where all of the different teams that would need to be activated if something were to happen, that there's already a plan during quiet times when you're not in the middle of a crisis, have a plan ready, actually practice and simulate those things through the years so that you're all ready to go. And then if something does happen, learn from that. Figure out what worked, what didn't, and then tweak that response plan so you're ready to go the next time. And that response plan needs to be more than one use case. It can't just be, it was a company breach. Okay. Well, there could just be an employee that goes rogue, let's say, in a different country, in a different language. How will you prepare for that if that goes viral, right? There are so many scenarios that I have been through myself.
Yes, and when you think of those, they sound far-fetched, but the one I remember, the way you explained it, the one I remember was Mr. Beast. He had like 3 or 4 employees that came out and made videos. They were like 15 million views, one after the other. So if you're like, oh, that's a far-fetched idea, I'm pretty sure he never anticipated that so many, and they were like multi-step videos exposing, whatever they call them. They felt like, and the brand might say that is a disgruntled employee. The employee says, "No, I'm sharing the truth," but you need to have a plan that something like that could happen.
And it can, because it does. And I would also say, I don't know if it's because of the pandemic when we were all huddled in our homes all over the world or what it was, but I feel since the pandemic, social media has really changed in terms of opening up conversation where people feel really emboldened to participate and just share whatever. That's, I think, why we are seeing this funky shift happening on LinkedIn, for example, where we see some people that are getting, annoyed with some of the other channels. And so they're transposing things onto LinkedIn, but LinkedIn wasn't made to be a TikTok or a Facebook, right? So it'll all adjust itself, and we will, I think, still continue to use the different platforms as they are meant to be used because they each serve a different purpose, especially when we talk about it for brands. And so that's something you have to think about as you're building a social practice of what are you going to open and what's the purpose? How will you use them so they're different, but they all work together like an orchestra?
Yeah. And I think we talked about this yesterday, a couple of days ago, where if you go right now on YouTube, every single thumbnail is an agency doing 10 or 100K a month. It's 10 or 100. There's nothing as if these agencies don't exist, as if no one is struggling. They all have like the zero jumping to a 10 or to 100, as if that's a recipe for that is the norm. And what happens is, at least this is my experience. I literally skip. Okay, it's the same thumbnail. It's the same. This is how to build this from 0 to 10, from 0 to 100. And I'm like, that's not really how it works. Not even in when they throw like the 90 days stuff. That is when I definitely skip over because you've seen it. It might have worked, and now they're taking that. And luckily on LinkedIn, you don't have those thumbnails. It is different. People don't really react, so the algorithm doesn't push and doesn't show that content that much. Now, that brings me to my next question, which is about building social media presence the wrong way. You've seen that that works, and you have good intentions. Like, let me show that, but you've seen that that works. You have good intentions. You put out some stuff. You get some signals. Your team now amplifies that, and then you start to do that repetitively. But that's not, you've now have a presence, you have the advocacy working, but that's not your tone of voice. That's not really your brand. That's not really how you feel about these things. But now it's already some sort of presence is being built. What are some of the steps that someone needs to take to not build presence, social media presence the wrong way?
That's a great question. And I think that a lot of companies feel like, well, we're on social, so it must be fine. We got that checkbox covered, you know. But at the end of the day, social media actually is a strategy, and then it's got a bunch of channels. You could be on X or whatever you want to be on. So where I think that the most broken part is that they're using a tactical approach. Sort of like throw this post up there. Okay, we're good. We made it. But if you start to look at a lot of brands, you may see that if you really look at their feeds, they're consistently getting low engagement. So they're just doing tactics rather than thinking about, let's make a strategy and let's make sure that that social strategy is actually tied very, very closely to the company goals, what's sales focused on, and what's marketing focused on, and make sure social is supporting those things rather than let's just put up posts and see what happens. Oh, we got this content, right? A lot of times too, and I've experienced this where social is such an afterthought that they're coming up with all the assets for, let's say, the web or other digital properties, and then they just resize it and throw it up on social. Well, the thing is that social works super differently than any of the other channels, right? It is meant to be a two-way conversation. That's where it really thrives. So if you're just putting something out there to check a box, people will feel that and they're not going to be motivated. They need to have some emotion to participate, right? So if a company can take a step back, first outline what are the company goals, and then understand sales and marketing, and then from there figure out how could social actually create impact, because that's the other thing too. If you're asking social to go to a super targeted audience in order to yield pipeline, social is probably not your place to do that. Social is going to just be that brand awareness piece because it is hard to target unless you use paid. And yes, you could do that. But, even then, you need more than just that strategy, right? So coming up with that clear strategy and then also setting realistic expectations that social media is going to do a certain amount, but it's not going to get to all your CEOs, let's say, in your niche market. So
Yeah.
then figuring out how will that work and how will you track it to know if it's successful or not, right? And be realistic about that. And then from there, you'll know how much you want to put towards social media in the future in terms of resources, budget, all of the things. And also the last bit is companies, I think that they have to be on every channel. I can't tell you how many times I hear, so should we get on Blue Sky right now? And it's like, well, let's hold on, or I haven't been on TikTok, but I think that might be the way to go right now. It's like, well, you're a finance company. Maybe TikTok's not exactly your niche market. So it's going back to, well, is your audience hanging out and where are they actually participating, where you see them talking? That's probably where you should start. Get that down really well and then grow over time, right? Instead of trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Right. It's the thing that we've heard many times, but people get into the panic mode. They hit the panic button, post everywhere, be everywhere with a tactical approach instead of like a strategy. And I think what you mentioned here is very interesting that I think people now they merge the word marketing with social media marketing. There is no marketing and then social media. It's social media marketing. And they use social media as that is the marketing. There is the marketing strategy is the social media marketing strategy. There's no difference in we have a marketing, this is the marketing goal. There's all of those things that large organizations do. They differentiate that because it's not just social media. They might use PR, they might use emails as well. There's different, and people kind of mush those those things together, and really you start to see the impact how it's different. Where you try to say that you have to separate those things to get the best impact. Now, let's say someone has the bind, like Elizabeth. I hear you. I see the benefit. This is fantastic. I never thought of it that way. You said they have to have a couple of things in place, like the social media listening, like the brand advocacy tools. What are some of the tools that when you go to a company, like, look, these are your options, these are the best ones that I've seen, because I think people don't know that much about those. They probably will just jump to Hootsuite, for example, because that's the most popular one, and they will just assume that's the one that will do everything. What are some of the tools that you would say to someone, if I come in and we need to start doing these things, these are the tools you have to have, or before have, at least for like 90 days to collect some data? What are the typical tools for social media listening, for social media advocacy?
Those are great questions. So I do think that there's a time and a place for different types of tools as well, depending on where the company is in their journey. A really small startup type company probably doesn't need anything more than a Hootsuite because it's easy to use, as an example, and you can jump in right away, and you probably don't have too many channels or complexity. They also just recently increased their listening capacity, so that will help for that type of a company. As you start to get into mid-market and into enterprise, certainly that type of a tool would be fine. However, there are some tools that are more robust as you start to have more needs. And you can see that there are some out there where they try to combine things, like Sprout Social, for example, is a great publishing tool, but they also have an advocacy tool. Sprinklr is another one that offers that. They also both offer listening, advocacy, publishing. However, there are costs, and you have to think about that. What is going to be better for your organization? To have an all-inclusive type of package that could be quite costly depending on nuances. How many queries can you run for listening? What does your threshold look like per month? Like all the different things. How many users can you have? Versus you might say, you know what, I want to find a platform that does really well for publishing and routing, because you do get things where you might want it to go to customer service or whatever. But I might want my listening tool to be a different platform, like a brand watch, let's say, or something, a tried and true. So you have to look at it and evaluate what's going to be the best. Then you have other players in the game, like Khoros, for example, that has the community function. Okay, well, how close do you want social media and community to be together? That might be an interesting synergy. So you have to look at all those things. And then when you think about advocacy, so my stance on advocacy is that if your organization is looking to really make sure your employees are empowered across the different channels and that it can be agnostic, then I think you have to look for tools like EveryoneSocial is one of the best ones on the market. They are really keen on data, so you can get a lot from it, and they're doing some really interesting things around that data that gives insights beyond just the advocates themselves, but back to the marketing organization altogether. So it just really depends on how invested do you want to be, and how much money do you have too, because all these things do add up. And it's not just those platforms to think about. You also want to think about creating a custom domain, the little, 4-letter ticker symbol, so to speak, that you use for Bitly or other shorteners, for example. That is just another brand opportunity that you want to use that ties into your advocacy platforms too, and your listening, all the things. So there's many different things. And then there's also thinking about, well, let's say you want to be super active on doing video, live video. Well, then you might want to be thinking about things like Restream or many other, video players that are out there for broadcasting and such. So there's a tech stack for sure. I think one last thing I would say is I think it's also important for the organization to really think about what is their overall metrics goal that they're trying to achieve, because social media absolutely can have impact to the pipeline, but it's got to be where the tools are talking to each other so that attribution can go from that first touch on social media and then go all the way through. That's one area that I think a lot of companies struggle in. And I personally have experienced that, of where you get that first touch attribution, but then somehow it gets lost. And then and then social media ends up looking like it only had a small sliver in the impact for the brand, and everything goes to web then at that point, right? So it's just something to think about of how do you use these different tools.
Right. And these are fantastic tools because I've heard of Sprout Social. I always thought is a just for posting, nothing to do with the advocacy. Brian Watch, I thought it was not just for social. I thought it was for like you connect a bunch of stuff and then you can watch even what is mentioned on Google and stuff like that. So it's good to hear for someone that has been using these things for many years how you can properly use them. And it feels like if you're too small, the first starting point that you mentioned, like before you get here, is that Slack or email where these are the posts, these are the assets, three people that needs to know about it. We can manage with that, and then have your maybe shortened domain or the publishing, and then you can kind of connect some of them and pull some numbers as a good starting point. Now, let's say Elizabeth, someone watched this whole thing like, man, this is fantastic. I really want to do this. How did it get a hold of you to work with you?
Oh, thanks for asking. I'd love to hear from anybody that would love to work together. The easiest way is probably just going to my LinkedIn, Elizabeth T. Houston on LinkedIn. And also, they can email me. That's Elizabeth at elizabethhoustonllc.com. And I'd love to interact. Following my posts on LinkedIn is probably another great resource too. I'm highly active on LinkedIn. So we can even exchange notes that way and get to know each other. And my offerings are also on my LinkedIn profile, so people can check that out too.
That's fantastic, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing all of these things. It gave us a completely different perspective on what is advocacy and social listening and how to do it the right way. So I appreciate sharing all of those things with us, and I wish you all the best.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for your time and for these great questions and for your interest. It's always a pleasure talking to you.